She killed her.
She killed her. I'll tell you why in a minute. Why my instinct was that way. It was my gut feeling.
She's done something to her.
They said she was just sleeping beside a gallon of milk. But what if that was the last time anyone truly saw her alive? The image of 5-year-old Summer Wells lying motionless in the back seat, next to that ordinary white jug, has become one of the most haunting symbols in true crime. To some, it's innocence. To others, a silent confession caught in plain sight. And then came the money. A $25,000 reward meant to bring hope, but instead it exposed motive, suspicion, and a family already drowning in secrets. Tonight, we unravel both. The milk gallon that froze a moment in time, and the reward that twisted everything after. You're watching Crime Wisp, where every object tells a story, and every silence hides intent. Subscribe, join the search, and let's follow the trail where logic ends and truth begins. It was supposed to be an ordinary errand, a day of small routines under the Tennessee summer sun. But somewhere between the grocery store and the drive home, something changed. In the back seat of Candace Bly's silver truck, 5-year-old Summer Wells lay beside a gallon of milk. Her head rested awkwardly, her skin pale against the plastic white of the jug. To an outsider, it might have looked like a tired child who had simply fallen asleep after a long, hot day. But to Hunter, the teenage boy who rode with them that afternoon, it felt wrong, too still, too quiet. And that single image, a child motionless beside a container meant to symbolize care and nourishment, would become one of the most enduring mysteries of the entire case. According to Hunter, the day began normally. Candace picked him up, with Summer and her mother's mother, known locally as Grandis, in the car. They went to the hospital for Grandis's knee injection, then to a swimming hole, and finally stopped for groceries. By late afternoon, the car smelled of heat and milk and fast food. Hunter remembers the way Summer's head tilted, her hair damp from the pool, her small arm resting against the gallon jug. The picture stuck in his mind because something about it felt final, as if the scene itself knew how it would be remembered. In later interviews, he said she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't look like herself. He used one word again and again: off. Investigators later verified parts of this timeline, but never confirmed Hunter's emotional account. Still, the detail of the milk gallon remained constant in every retelling, anchored in memory like a photograph no one took but everyone can see. In true crime, these anchor images often define public perception. John Bonet's glittering pageant photo, Kaylee Anthony's smiling portrait in a backyard pool. For Summer Wells, it was that milk jug, a symbol of domestic life turned into a haunting relic. The image forced everyone to ask the same question: was she sleeping, sedated, or already gone? To understand why this detail matters so much, you have to consider how the human brain processes shock. When something horrifying happens, it latches onto mundane details: the color of a shirt, the smell of plastic, the sound of air conditioning. Those details become emotional bookmarks, freezing trauma into a single frame. That's why the milk gallon moment carries such psychological weight. It isn't just evidence, it's memory distilled into symbol. And symbols, especially in true crime, are powerful. They survive long after facts are forgotten. There's also a forensic dimension to this moment. If Summer was indeed alive during that drive, her posture, skin tone, and temperature could have provided clues. But no photo was ever released. What remains is Hunter's testimony and the inconsistencies that ripple through it. Teen witnesses are notoriously unreliable, shaped by fear, guilt, and suggestion. Yet Hunter's specific memory of the milk jug, unchanging through interviews, lends it a strange credibility. He might have misremembered times or words, but not that image. It branded itself into his mind because it was real, at least to him. Candace's reaction to Hunter's account only deepened suspicion. When confronted, she snapped, calling him a liar, insisting he had twisted everything. But her anger didn't erase the question. It amplified it. If it was truly just an innocent snapshot, why not dismiss it calmly? Why fight so hard to discredit a teenager unless the story touched something raw? Investigators noticed her defensiveness, her refusal to elaborate. In psychology, defensiveness often masks guilt, not necessarily of a crime, but of knowledge, knowing something terrible happened and trying to hide how close you were to it. Then there's the symbolic irony. Milk, the most basic form of nourishment, became the backdrop for a mystery about loss. In literature, milk represents purity, renewal, even motherhood. In this story, it turned into an emblem of decay, life beside death, innocence beside neglect. Every time that detail resurfaces online, the meaning shifts. To some, it's proof of tragedy. To others, it's proof of manipulation, an image crafted, intentionally or not, to mask something darker. Could Candace have staged the scene to make it look like Summer fell asleep? Or was it simply the tragic coincidence of a tired child and an unseeing mother? Investigators have never said the milk gallon held forensic value. Maybe it didn't. But in narrative terms, it holds everything. It represents the last known sighting of Summer, the blurred border between ordinary and ominous. That's why it dominates social media discussions and YouTube theories years later. People replay that mental photograph because it gives shape to uncertainty. The truth might be unknowable, but the image feels like proof that somewhere in that car, truth existed, if only for a moment. When reconstructing cases like this, behavioral analysts look for turning points, the instant where an innocent day begins to collapse into tragedy. The milk gallon moment could be that pivot. Before it, the timeline makes sense. Errands, swimming, groceries. After it, everything unravels. The child disappears, the mother's story fractures, and the investigation drifts into contradiction. This is why many armchair detectives treat the milk jug as a timestamp of inevitability, the moment when Summer's fate was sealed, whether by accident, negligence, or intent. But what if this image endures not because it reveals the truth, but because it mirrors something deeper? Our need to make sense of randomness. The human mind can't stand empty space. It fills it with pattern. Maybe the milk jug became a canvas for projection. Everyone saw what they feared most: carelessness, guilt, cover-up. Yet even if Hunter exaggerated, his story still reflects a real emotional truth about that environment. A world where a child lying still in the back seat didn't set off alarm bells because stillness had become normal. Exhaustion had become the language of daily life. And perhaps that's what truly haunts people about this detail. The idea that the warning signs weren't hidden. They were visible, ordinary, unremarkable. That the tragedy didn't begin with violence, but with fatigue. In that sense, the milk gallon isn't just a clue, it's a mirror. It shows us how indifference looks when photographed in daylight. It's what happens when life becomes so chaotic that death can ride quietly beside you, unnoticed, mistaken for rest. As the car pulled up to the Wells property that afternoon, the world outside still looked normal. Sunlight cutting through trees, dogs barking in the distance, everything unchanged. But inside that car, something irreversible had already taken root. Whether Summer was sleeping or gone, the result was the same. A mother too distracted, too disconnected to see the difference. By the time the milk chilled in the refrigerator, the story had already frozen too. One child missing, one family unraveling, and one image that would never stop echoing. A little girl, a gallon of milk, and a silence that still hasn't broken. Money has a way of warping grief. It twists desperation into suspicion, and what begins as hope can end as doubt. When the $25,000 reward was announced for information about Summer Wells, it should have been a moment of unity, a sign that the community still believed she could be found. Instead, It marked the beginning of one of the most uncomfortable chapters in the case. Within hours of hearing the news, Candace Bly reportedly got into her car and drove straight to the sheriff's office. No hesitation, no waiting for new leads or volunteer searches, straight to the money. To some, that urgency looked like the reflex of a mother desperate to do anything to bring her daughter home. But to others, it felt like calculation, an instinct to control the narrative before it controlled her. From that moment forward, the Wells family's relationship with the public changed. The lines between grief, guilt, and greed blurred. And once those lines blur, they rarely come back into focus. Rewards are meant to inspire truth, but in true crime history, they often reveal character instead. Sociologists call it the motive inversion. When money enters a case, people stop asking, "Who's guilty?" and start asking, "Who benefits?" In Hawkins County, a place marked by financial struggle, addiction, and mistrust, the appearance of $25,000 didn't just offer incentive, it offered temptation. It created an invisible test, and Candace failed it in the eyes of many. The optics of a mother rushing to discuss reward logistics before the body was even found ignited 1,000 theories. Was she protecting her right to claim the money if Summer was discovered? Was she trying to stay close to law enforcement to control what they learned? Or was it pure panic, a clumsy human attempt to feel useful when everything else was slipping away? Behavioral analysts would later say that Candace's reaction revealed something critical: the psychology of self-preservation. People under stress often try to reassert control, even through gestures that appear selfish or suspicious. Driving to the sheriff's office may not have been greed. It might have been fear, the fear of being left out, the fear of being accused, the fear of losing the only sliver of power she had left. But intent doesn't erase perception. And perception, in the age of social media, is everything. Online forums seized on the story instantly. In threads and live streams, the phrase $25,000 motive spread like wildfire. Every move Candace made after that was filtered through the lens of potential gain. If she cried, was she performing? If she stayed silent, was she hiding? The money, meant to bring people closer to the truth, instead widened the gap between the Wells family and the community that once rallied behind them. Even those who had defended her began to wonder. Money, after all, doesn't change people. It exposes them. Investigators, for their part, never suggested Candace tried to claim the reward. Yet, they didn't need to. The damage was already done. Once the idea of financial motive entered public consciousness, it became a permanent stain. And in behavioral forensics, motive doesn't have to be proven to have power. It only has to be believed. From that point onward, Candace's every action was read as a negotiation, not between truth and lies, but between survival and exposure. There's a tragic irony here. In most missing child cases, money unites the community, turns tragedy into collaboration. In this one, it did the opposite. The Wells family's history with addiction and instability made the offer feel like a trap instead of a gift. Poverty changes how people respond to opportunity. To those who have lived on the edge, large sums of money represent both salvation and suspicion. And when grief mixes with that psychology, the results can look monstrous to outsiders. What might have been a simple drive to stay informed looked, under the harsh light of rumor, like proof of corruption. Criminal psychologists studying the case saw something deeper in Candace's timing. Her decision to go to the sheriff's office so quickly suggests what experts call perception management. It's a subconscious reflex to reclaim control of the story before others define it. By placing herself at the center of the reward narrative, Candace could appear proactive, involved, even helpful. But it also tethered her publicly to the concept of money forever. In every future interview, The $25,000 shadow followed her. The internet amplified this shadow into spectacle. Comparisons were made to Casey Anthony, whose family's handling of donations fueled nationwide outrage, and to the McCanns, whose fundraising after their daughter's disappearance was viewed with cynicism. Each example fed the idea that when parents move too close to money, sincerity dies. In this climate, Candace didn't stand a chance. Her reputation, already fragile, shattered under the weight of a narrative she couldn't control. There's a sociological truth that applies here. Communities judge grief by behavior, not by fact. They expect mothers to collapse, fathers to rage, families to beg. When they don't, suspicion replaces empathy. Candace didn't act like the kind of grieving mother people wanted to see. Her voice was flat, her words rehearsed, her body language defensive. And when she drove to the sheriff's office, it confirmed what many already believed, that her emotions were performative, her motives transactional. But maybe the truth is more complex. Maybe Candace wasn't calculating or greedy. Maybe she was broken. Maybe she thought being present at the sheriff's office would prove she cared, that she was doing something, anything. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like movement, even meaningless movement, just to keep from collapsing. Yet intent doesn't erase optics. Once the story became, the mother ran toward the money, no amount of explanation could undo it. Investigators understand how small gestures become defining symbols. They know that public perception can influence juries, witnesses, and even investigative priorities. That's why many remain silent while cases unfold, to avoid fueling the storm. But silence, as always, has its own price. In the absence of clear answers, speculation becomes truth. The Wells case was no exception. By the time weeks turned into months, the $25,000 reward had lost its practical purpose. No credible leads emerged. No one claimed the money. But the damage lingered. It had changed how the world saw Candace Bly, from grieving mother to potential manipulator. And that shift didn't just affect her, it shaped how every new piece of evidence was interpreted afterward. The deleted text, the milk gallon, the adoption rumor, they all took on darker meanings once money entered the picture. When viewed together, these threads form what behavioral analysts call a pattern of dysfunction, secrecy, neglect, resentment, and now, self-preservation. Each alone could be explained away, but combined, they paint a picture of a family operating under chronic instability, where every crisis becomes an opportunity to control, deflect, or survive. That's the real story behind the $25,000 motive. Not that money caused a crime, but that it revealed one. The slow corruption of empathy inside a home already drowning in denial. The Wells family didn't just lose a child. They lost the ability to tell their story without suspicion. And once money entered the frame, every silence became proof. Every word became performance. In the end, no one ever collected the reward. The money expired, but the motive lived on. In every thread, every video, every whisper of, "She ran to the sheriff's office." It became part of the legend of this case, a symbol of how easily tragedy turns transactional. And maybe that's the cruelest irony of all, that a child vanished, a mother broke under scrutiny, and a promise of hope became the very thing that made everyone stop believing her. In every long investigation, there comes a moment when the details stop standing alone and start forming a pattern. For Summer Wells, that moment arrives when you place all 5 clues side by side: the deleted text message, the neglect, the talk of adoption, the haunting image of the milk gallon, and the $25,000 reward. Each one by itself could be explained away. Together, they sketch a map of dysfunction that investigators and the public can't ignore. The message, "It was done," introduces secrecy. It shows the impulse to hide. Neglect shows indifference, the daily erosion of responsibility. The adoption rumor reveals emotional fracture, a family that may not have wanted its own child. The milk gallon scene captures the moment of ambiguity, life or death, innocence or evidence. And the money, finally, exposes self-preservation, the instinct to protect oneself above all else. When seen together, these are not random fragments. They are the behavioral fingerprints of collapse. Investigators often talk about continuity of behavior, the idea that crises rarely emerge from nowhere. What people do in tragedy reflects what they've been doing all along. If you examine the Wells family through that lens, the case stops being a mystery about one vanished child and becomes a chronicle of small decisions accumulating into catastrophe. The secrecy, the avoidance, the defensiveness, all were habits before they became red flags. The disappearance didn't create those traits, it merely revealed them. When you trace the Wells story backward, you find a rhythm of instability that had already hardened into normality: fights, substances, broken promises, silence. Summer grew up in the middle of that rhythm, learning that adults were unpredictable, that chaos was ordinary. When a family reaches that level of dysfunction, danger doesn't need to force its way in. It's already living inside the walls. That's why many analysts believe the real mystery here isn't what happened to Summer, but why it was allowed to happen. The difference between accident, neglect, and cover-up begins to blur when the same behaviors drive all three. Maybe no one meant harm. Maybe the harm was simply inevitable, written in the structure of their lives. In that sense, the text, the milk, the money, they are all symptoms of the same disease, a home hollowed out by secrecy and fear. When the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation went silent, the internet filled the void. Armchair detectives, YouTubers, Reddit threads, everyone began connecting dots. But connection isn't the same as truth. Theories multiplied until the investigation itself became background noise. What once was a search for a child turned into a dissection of character. People weren't asking, "Where is Summer?" anymore. They were asking who is lying the most convincingly. This digital storm created a second reality, one where fact and speculation blurred until they were indistinguishable. On one side, believers argued that Candace and Dawn were victims of addiction and poverty, not malice. On the other, skeptics saw manipulation and deceit in every glance, every pause. And somewhere in the middle, the real Summer, the child at the heart of it all, began to disappear again, this time beneath the noise of judgment. Yet there is something strangely revealing about this digital obsession. It shows that people still believe in patterns, in cause and effect, in the idea that even the most chaotic story must make sense if you look closely enough. Maybe that's why the case refuses to fade. It's not just the mystery, it's the mirror it holds up to everyone watching. We see our own hunger for certainty, our own fear of randomness. A little girl vanishing without explanation is unbearable, so we build one. But beneath all the theories, one truth remains constant. Every piece of evidence in this case points toward dysfunction, not intrusion. The Wells family didn't lose Summer to a stranger in the dark. They lost her to years of disconnection, a slow-motion implosion that no one stopped. In the behavioral timeline, the disappearance was not a sudden event. It was the last act of a long collapse. Even law enforcement's silence fits that pattern. In the absence of progress, officials retreat behind procedure, just as the family retreats behind denial. The same instinct, to control, to avoid, to endure, repeats on every level. That's what makes this story so haunting. It isn't only about guilt or innocence. It's about systems breaking down, from household to community to investigation. 4 years later, we still don't know what those 3 words, "it was done," truly meant. Maybe they were a lie. Maybe they were a confession. Or maybe they were something else entirely. A metaphor for the case itself, for the way truth gets deleted, buried, and left in the trash folder of memory. Because whether by accident or design, that's exactly what happened to Summer Wells. She was erased in slow motion. The internet continues to search, to speculate, to dig. But what if the answer isn't hidden in a text or a photo? What if the answer is the pattern itself? The proof that tragedy is rarely sudden, that disappearance is only the visible tip of a much longer decay? When a family lives in secrecy long enough, truth becomes impossible to separate from rumor. By the time something terrible happens, no one can tell the difference between a cover-up and a habit. And that's the quiet horror at the heart of this case. It's not just that we don't know what happened, it's that maybe everyone involved stopped knowing too. They lost track of what was true and what was convenient, what was mistake and what was choice. When that happens, justice itself becomes a mirage, always visible, never reachable. So the question remains, was Summer taken, or was she lost long before that day? The evidence suggests both can be true, because children don't vanish in a vacuum. They disappear in the shadows of lives already collapsing. The Wells story, stripped of rumor, is a portrait of those shadows. A reminder that the scariest mysteries aren't solved with confessions, but with clarity. Until that clarity comes, all we have are the clues. 5 fragments of truth orbiting a single missing girl. A deleted text, a pattern of neglect, a grandmother's plea, a milk jug, a reward that corrupted hope, each one small enough to ignore, yet together heavy enough to bury a story. And somewhere beneath them lies what everyone is still searching for. Not just what happened to Summer Wells, but how so many people managed not to see it coming. Every mystery leaves behind echoes, but few linger like this one. The story of Summer Wells isn't just about a little girl who vanished. It's about silence, patterns, and the painful truth that some disappearances begin long before a child is gone. Each clue we've explored, the text, the milk jug, the reward, is more than evidence. They're reflections of choices, fears, and secrets that shaped a tragedy no one was brave enough to stop. Here at Crime Wisp, we don't chase headlines. We chase the quiet details that others overlook, because truth often hides in plain sight. If you believe every case deserves clarity, every child deserves justice, and every silence deserves to be broken, subscribe now and join our investigation. Turn on the bell, share this story, and keep the conversation alive. One voice, one memory, one tip could finally bring light to the shadows that took Summer Wells.